Take it away, Carson.
Zohran Mamdani has surged to the forefront of the New York City mayoral race after his victory in the Democratic primaries. This self-titled socialist has captured hearts and minds, armed with a PR team intimately connected to Gen Z TikTok culture, promises of opposition to Trump, rent control, free buses, and stabilized prices. Mamdani seems primed to rejuvenate the progressive camp of the Democratic Party. For their part, the left has widely lauded Zohran, or at the very least, the Mamdani moment. Today, the DSA is ecstatic about Zohran, where his forebear, AOC, who also once appeared to represent a challenge to the establishment, is largely discredited for supporting Israel, Genocide Joe, and spiking a rail strike. To understand Zohran's popularity, we must begin with a clear conception of what is happening in America and the world right now. It is undeniable that something in the American political terrain has changed fundamentally. Trump has enjoyed a plenary power far beyond anything he wielded in his first term. The question is, why can he do this? The reason he is able to violate the rules and status quo with impunity, while his opposition in the Democrats sits quietly, is because the American empire is in terminal decline. A crisis is on the horizon, indicated by slowed economic growth, declining employment, and heightened protectionism. The US can no longer afford the luxury of liberal democracy at home and must resort to open state violence, constant state intervention, and repression. All this is evident enough in mass deportations, the deployment of National Guard and military forces, widespread economic unease, and heightened aggression towards China and the neo-colonial world. This week, Trump declared an imperialist peace in the Middle East, which can only serve to give Israel a free hand to exterminate the Palestinian people. Concurrent with the approaching crisis, and as a result of Trump's shock therapy economic policies, the standard of living for the American working class is also in decline. And for the first time in a long time, so too is the general standard of living for large masses of the American middle class. Trump's goal is to clear any obstacles to reindustrializing and rearming the American empire and prepare the US imperialists to emerge from the crisis in a dominant position. For the Trump administration, every political move has the sense of bagging up and taking out the liberal garbage, which has made itself a hindrance to the limitless exploitation demanded by imperialism. Amidst great social anxiety, and conjoined to a program utterly impotent to halt Trump's offensive, the liberals and their left appendages clamor for a savior. Any savior besides the politically independent working class, of course. The defeat of the Democrats in 2024 and Trump's crusade against the political status quo was bound to have reverberations and curious reflections. The internal status quo of the party is no longer particularly viable for the Democrats, who are equally committed to shoring up US imperialism. And their answer for this must be a transformation of their image. For the DSA, this means pushing the Democrats toward a tactic which has saved them in the past, the road of FDR, progressivism. The space for a candidate like Zohran within the Democratic Party is made, in a broad sense, through the impotence of establishment liberalism. But history teaches us an important lesson on this count. The progressives who carved their careers from this marble of democratic disgrace primarily served to rebuild the party's broken reputation amongst the masses and prevent those masses from looking elsewhere for leadership. We need only look so far into the past as the frantic scrambling of AOC, Bernie Sanders, and Ilhan Omar to fortify the 2024 Harris-Biden Democratic ticket whilst claiming to defend Palestine. As this tragicomic drama unfolds, Zohran Mamdani enters stage left. In Zohran, our players have found their unfinished messiah, an apparent challenger to the hated establishment in these dark and troubled times. However, if one is to even begin to fight the establishment and claim to defend the interests of the masses, one needs firm political ground beneath their feet, and a program which does not look to the capitalist class to resolve the very problems said capitalists are causing. The bare minimum to lay this political ground would be independence from the capitalists, here meaning a real organizational break from the Democratic Party. Moreover, you must stand on basic principles like clear opposition to Zionism and US imperialism, which strangle the American workers and the entire world. Furthermore, one should fight to expose the crimes of the capitalist state against the masses, not build a partnership with the state's armed fist, the police. If you claim to support the oppressed, you cannot align yourself with forces who literally kill them. These are basic conditions for socialists to support any candidate. Does Zohran do this? In short, no. Zohran maintains his membership in the Democratic Party and on their ticket. He has retreated from clear positions against Zionism, taken public positions justifying US imperialism, and sought public rapprochement with the police. Far from meeting the basic standards of a socialist, his positions actually demonstrate he is assimilating into the very establishment which we must fight. Instead of rejecting such flirtations with the ruling class, his supporters in the DSA insist he must do what it takes to get elected, whilst also siding with the oppressed. Yet the two things negate each other. As a Democratic Party politician, what it takes to get elected flows from the interests of the oligarchy, i.e. showing you can be their best representative in crushing the oppressed. It does not flow from the interests of his voters. As such, I might say this is a tale of two Zohrans. On the one hand, what the DSA imagines him to be, a man who in his heart of hearts wants to struggle for socialism and the rights of all New Yorkers. On the other, Zohran as he really is, a politician performing an invaluable service for the Democratic Party, preventing disaffected activists and workers from looking beyond the prison of the Democrats. Unfortunately for the first Zohran, his continuous rightward movement during the campaign is the expression of his meeting the conditions to be the progressive representative of the Democrats and their Wall Street backers. It is precisely what some would call compromise with the establishment, which is the defining feature of Mamdani's politics, not a confused course which he can be dissuaded from pursuing. Such compromise is the sacrosanct basis of operating within the Democratic Party. The hideousness of this process of assimilation is provoking a reaction amongst his leftist supporters. But what is needed is not to remind Zohran of his past and beg him to keep his promises, but to fight for a decisive break with the establishment, making clear any kind of socialist support is conditional on meeting our demands. Let us begin with a charitable assessment of Mr. Mamdani. That is to say, challenge him on his strongest arguments. Let us assume that he truly wishes to make New York livable for the average New Yorker, that Zohran embodies the aspirations of the masses, rent control, opposition to Trump, and fair free transit. These demands are elementally supportable and very much needed as the working class and lower masses of the petty bourgeoisie struggle to afford the necessities of life amid stalling hiring and encroaching inflation. If Zohran did want to save New Yorkers, then he could not have chosen a worse vehicle in the Democratic Party. What some would call a pragmatic move is actually shooting himself in the foot insofar as he claims to oppose things like genocide, predatory renting practices, and police brutality. There can be no question of the Democratic Party's support to the Israeli state in the ongoing Palestinian genocide, nor of their abysmal track record amongst workers, itself indicated by the large numbers who supported Trump. After all, to what party did the hated Cuomo belong when he ruined New York? The disgust at decades-long Democratic rule in New York is self-evident in the number of people supporting Zohran against other Democratic politicians. Yet, within the Democratic Party, Mamdani remains. Whether we assume this is an honest mistake or a pragmatic move, both reduce to the same thing. Zohran's presence on the Democratic ticket proves that he does not particularly trust the power of his base to put him into office. His presence on the Democratic ticket is a tacit acknowledgement that he needs the party apparatus. If he sincerely thought he could rely on only his base without any connection to the hated establishment, he would not be on the Democratic ballot. It would be one thing if Zohran mobilized his 1,000-strong volunteer base and DSA supporters independent of and against the Democratic Party machine. But instead, he is leveraging his support base of activists and workers to join this machine, diverting their anger at the status quo into the same party of Cuomo. And we are seeing the consequences of this. We have also observed in great detail how this approach leads to betrayal after betrayal in the form of AOC. But why does this occur? Why must political attachment to the Democratic establishment lead to corruption from the top down and not transformation from the bottom up? Well, for one thing, it is the true powers behind the Democratic Party, financiers, big banks, and commercial landlords who in reality determine the party line and who will be on the ballot. Look at what happened when Biden proved too senile to win them the election. He was unceremoniously and undemocratically axed from the ticket. From this, let us consider the perspective of the establishment toward progressives. What services do such politicians provide for a party founded on big finance? Consider AOC. She started her career calling for a working class champion within the Democrats, much like Zohran today. In this, she was quite effective at getting working people, even some Trump supporters, to vote for her, a Democrat. More than a vote, she was convincing workers to bind themselves to the Democratic Party as a whole, stopping any kind of fight outside of and against the billionaires and their party. Thusly, when actual working people organized for a rail strike, which could have been the biggest in decades and threatened a titanic blow against American capitalism, all pretense of the people's champion vanished into thin air when the Democratic Party drew a naked class line against the workers, declaring the strike illegal. AOC used her working class credentials and her vote to undercut a fight against the rail barons. More than that, to maintain her pro-labor credentials, she promised to give sick days as a concession for the workers not striking. Not only was this inadequate, but the workers didn't get any of it because to meet their most basic needs required a fight against the rail bosses, a fight AOC successfully diverted. This betrayal did not originate in the character of AOC. It originated in the program of class collaboration necessary to be a progressive Democrat. For AOC or any socialist elected to have a political career in the Democratic Party, they must demonstrate time and time again their usefulness to the establishment, whom I think few would argue are friendly to the masses. In fact, the establishment represents a class whose interests are completely antagonistic to our own. Any microscopic gains negotiated by progressives for the oppressed comes after they offer a pound of our flesh in trade. This is no clearer than in the Palestinian genocide. For the imperialist parties, Democrat or Republican, supporting Israel is sacred. It is central to American dominance in the Middle East and by extension, the world. It is this hegemony which is an essential part of maintaining control and the veil of democracy domestically. AOC has nakedly betrayed on this question, voting to fund the Israeli war machine, and Zohran has already ventured comments in defense of the Israeli state. This is not a social issue disconnected from economic worries at home. This is the pound, or rather 100,000 pounds of our flesh, which are offered as a condition of entry into the halls of capitalist power. Even Rashida Tlaib, who of the progressives went the farthest in criticizing Israel, could politically go no further than the uncommitted campaign, which was what exactly? It was nothing more than a redirecting of anger at the Democrats' role in the Palestinian genocide back into the same party, exerting negligible pressure on Biden and Harris by threatening to vote Democrat regardless. The attitude of the party toward Palestine never changed, but somehow voters went with Harris anyways. As we can see, no matter what positions Zohran may hold as an individual, being an elected in the Democratic Party comes with conditions. Not simple tit for tat, mind you, but promises to stand on the capitalist side of the bloodline when the time comes. The more influence progressives seek to have in the party, the greater must be their integration with the ruling class establishment itself. Political sway is gained by zealously advancing the interests of the capitalists and managing their affairs, which cannot be reconciled with those of workers. We are watching this happen with Zohran. He has retreated on police terror, apologizing to them, attending their funerals, and emphasizing their vital societal role. He has taken meetings with the New York City elite in order to assure them that he will not fundamentally threaten their interests. He has signaled his desire to have a productive partnership with Governor Kathy Hochul, herself a trenchant establishment Democrat. He defends Palestinian activists insofar as doing so does not cross into real anti-Zionism. And the cherry on top, he has explicitly called Cuba and Venezuela dictatorships at the exact same time they are under the gun from Trump and imperialism. Even at our most conciliatory toward Mr. Mamdani, we have to observe that he is walking the same path as every progressive before him, not because of his own moral fiber, but because this trajectory is inseparable from making a place in the capitalist Democratic Party. But wait, Zohran supporters interject. Isn't he the most pro-Palestinian candidate in the race? Surely he has not capitulated to the Democratic Party line on this question. Despite perception, the facts tell a different story. Though Zohran has spoken in defense of pro-Palestinian activists, when pressed on the issue by the media, he couples this defense with a recognition of the right of Israel to exist in an effort not to alienate state, corporate, and Zionist interests. This is the compromise politics of a progressive in action, dancing around an intractable line between the oppressed and their oppressors. Such negotiation can only serve to provide the Democratic Party with the progressive veneer under which they have executed the most brutal genocide in modern history. It even goes beyond Democrats. When the imperialist ceasefire deal was announced by the Trump administration, Zohran publicly praised it. Yet this very deal calls for fighters in Palestine to disarm and surrender to whatever whims and depredations the American imperialists see fit, amongst other terrible concessions. True anti-Zionism and anti-imperialism would demand unrelenting opposition to this treacherous ceasefire deal. Many on the left understand the immediate significance of breaking with Zionism, yet stubbornly insist on supporting politicians who refuse to make a real fight on the issue. The very idea of some kind of decisive class divide in the Democratic Party is an utter fantasy, which is dissolved upon every successive election and incorporation of progressives into its ranks. The rapacious, genocidal, repressive establishment, by mistake or by pragmatism, is the force which Zohran courts, and to which his courtship will necessarily betray his radical base. While the left fears Zohran will be corrupted by the establishment as a result of his contact with it, they actually lead the masses into the same poisonous political trap. We would be remiss not to discuss the greatest pole of Zohran's campaign, affordability. We have seen how his political approach of not seeking to make an enemy of the capitalists poses a danger to us. So how can we expect him to fight for an affordable New York when he is openly willing to compromise with the very forces responsible for the cost of living crisis? He cannot. Zohran proposes a rent freeze. Zohran proposes free buses. Zohran proposes free childcare, and Zohran proposes state-controlled grocery stores. Yet Zohran proposes doing all of this without proposing a real confrontation with the New York capitalists and financiers who control every aspect of life in the city. In truth, he has repeatedly met with the likes of JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon and the Partnership of NYC to pledge that he will work hand in hand with these capitalists. He wants a city for all New Yorkers. Comrades, are we really to include amongst our number the hostile class who exploits, oppresses, and economically strangles us? Instead of mobilizing the power of the working class to deal a blow to these parasites, Mamdani offers a shadow of concessions, whereby the capitalists of New York pay their fair share towards keeping the city running, notwithstanding the 1,000 legal loopholes and bureaucratic processes the capitalists have to avoid such measures. Zohran's own campaign eschews the most powerful means of halting the abuse of the oppressed, the social power of the working class. Zohran's popularity could provide a powerful platform for uniting groups such as tenants unions with industrial workers in transit, the harbor, and health and childcare. The people who actually run the city could be united in challenging those who rule it through the power of collective action. Instead, Zohran's approach dissolves this potential strength of his base by turning them into voting cattle, patiently waiting on campaign promises rather than acting now to stop the banks and landlords in their tracks. Take, for example, the DSA's work in tenant organizing. This could be a powerful tool to connect the anger at high rents and landlord abuse to the unions. Instead, the strategy of DSA is to look for allies in the city bureaucracy and Democrats in the city council and mayor's office. Not only does this divert the potential of tenant organizing into a constant loop of electoralism, focusing on affordability keeps the movement from touching an explosive struggle which could propel it forward, fighting segregation. New York City is infamous for its ghettos, decaying project buildings, and slumlords who exploit black people, immigrants, the working class, and the poor. To fight for affordability without a frontal assault on segregation will keep the conditions of black people the worst in the city. If the big landlords can continue keeping huge parts of the black population homeless or in the worst apartments while still raising rents exorbitantly, they can keep us divided and scrambling for the small number of apartments for which Zohran promises to freeze rent. So long as corporate landlords maintain their control of real estate, they can refuse to rent if the city demands they rent at a low price. Zohran seeks to avoid making a real fight by obscuring the actual nature of the struggle we must wage. And more than that, his entire strategy to achieve said affordability will only further divide the toiling masses, instead of directing their frustration toward the common class enemy. His means are limited to those which are ultimately acceptable to the ruling class. namely taxation. Whether this is a direct levy on the workers through things like congestion pricing, or indirect through taxes on the billionaires, which those billionaires will happily pass on to us via raising grocery prices, rents, and maintaining stagnant wages. Leaving aside for now the fact that all of their wealth is already stolen from the exploitation of workers. The simple truth of the entire affair is this: the left weakens itself by building coalitions with forces who innately harm us, whether through strike breaking, economic strangulation, the armed fist of the cops, or the most ferocious imperialism in history, whether in their progressive wing or their establishment. The longer one waits to break such an abusive, vicious cycle, the weaker one becomes, the more thoroughly trapped within it. To deny that we have the power to chart an independent course echoes the same as someone stuck in a toxic relationship. And do we not advise such friends that the very first step is to leave? Furthermore, to recant faith in the working masses is to contradict the position espoused by the DSA left and others, which reckons in the popularity of Zohran's campaign the great anger, power, and political awakening of said masses. If such a thing is true, should we not seize the initiative in guiding such anger away from the forces we know want to corral it? Should we not chart an independent course for the workers? If politicians depend on us to elect them, it stands to reason the real social power is in our hands. Do we want to restrict ourselves to the ballot box, compelled to choose the less bad of two bad options, or instead break with such a tactic and make our own way? What then of the movement for Zohran, the so-called Mamdani moment? Orbiting this orientation, we find a set of left organizations who, too bashful to hoist the banner of Zohran, and too fearful of their own shadows to dare lead the workers on an independent road, offer themselves the consolation prize of lauding the movement for Zohran. Into this basket, we can place organizations like Left Voice, whose recent propaganda has positioned them as left advisors to Mamdani in service of the popular movement surrounding him. Left Voice can be somewhat critical of Mamdani, running as a Democrat, but assert the movement is vital. They say, Zohran's rise shows that the working class in NYC and beyond is open to progressive politics, creating opportunities for the left to reach wider audiences. His campaign demonstrates that there is space to build a radical program for the working class and youth. In actuality, what we face is the opposite situation. The elemental frustrations and aspirations of the masses are not the same thing as the politicians and strategies working to mislead them. Meaning, if someone like Zohran is popular, the masses are not yet conscious of the necessary tasks and the danger he poses. People have not yet realized the need to fight against the Democratic Party and the progressives who divert the struggle away from the capitalists and back into manageable channels. Zohran's ability to be popular arises because he is able to play on the underdeveloped political consciousness of his base. His actions guide the consciousness of his supporters, meaning that they are open to his political strategy and unaware of their own power. Thus, there is a second problem of Left Voice's conclusion. The shift of society to the right is on full display with Trump's presidency and attacks. But Zohran's popularity is also part of the closing of a window of political openness which appeared last year before the elections and could have developed into a favorable break with the liberal status quo. Many DSA members, for example, were critical of AOC and Bernie for covering up the genocide and even called for AOC and other genocide supporters to be thrown out of the DSA. And yet, today, DSA members cheered when both Bernie and AOC endorsed Zohran. Left Voice seems to think that the left can exist side by side with Zohran, catching the pile of crumbs dropped in his wake. But Zohran is the obstacle to opportunities for the left. He is beating revolutionaries to the punch when it comes to leading the masses. Because so many leftists are enamored by him, they have actually failed to counterpose a working class alternative to Zohran. He is frustrating the struggle, directing it back into the controlled confines of the Democratic Party. Look at his campaign. He willfully drops the fight against special oppression in the name of focusing on bread and butter issues. But to do this means to surrender the masses to their continued division and conquest by the bosses. Today, Trump is exploiting these divisions by mobilizing ICE to target immigrants, claiming this will improve the lives of American workers, and is facing no significant blowback from the working class. On the surface, it may seem like Zohran can unite workers by focusing on economic hardship, but as we must see, his methods further divide the only class with real power to fight back by diverting their anger into another round of the electoral game. The Mamdani moment is the obstacle to winning young people, workers, and activists to socialism, because socialist politics are based on strengthening the workers' movement to fight for what they need now, not keeping them passive voters. Revolutionaries must fight to win workers and the oppressed out of this blind alley, must show them to get even their elemental demands. We have to decisively break, not just with the person of Mamdani, but with the entire progressive strategy for change. We must set the movement on a vastly different political basis than the one on which it currently rests. For all of this talk of the movement, there is no real acknowledgement of its entire political substance being bound to the program of Zohran and the Democrats themselves. Left Voice is an excellent example in playing the role of left advisor throughout this shabby electoral melodrama, concealing the need to break by insisting that the movement should be pushed left, without addressing the fundamental obstacles for doing so and the foundation of the entire affair. If the movement for Zohran is laudable, why not simply liquidate into Mamdani's campaign? This position of cheering the movement is a case of undisguised centrism. Partially, it reflects a better understanding by Left Voice of the danger from Mamdani and the Democrats. On the other, instead of resolving the problem, their orientation maintains a veiled connection to the political program from which the left must break. In some ways, this makes it more effective at obscuring what revolutionaries must do. What should revolutionaries do? I have spoken at length regarding the content of Zohran's campaign, but have, as yet, only hinted at what is to be done. Let me now rectify it. We have, in the course of this forum, moved closer and closer, I hope, to an understanding of the need to decisively break the masses and the left from the campaign and politics of Zohran Mamdani by providing a revolutionary counterposition to it. So I say, to the Palestinian movement, Zohran is not an ally. He has demonstrated that his career in the Democratic Party is more important than genuinely fighting to liberate Palestine. To actually achieve any victory against this Zionist state and imperialists, you must seek to build an alliance with the working class. The general strike in Italy presents a powerful example of what such an alliance might accomplish. Yet it is already undermined by countless progressives in the Italian left and trade union bureaucracy who want workers to vent their anger in the streets instead of interdicting weapons cargo bound for Israel. The workers have the social power and a real interest in stopping the oppression of Palestine, which fuels the American war machine repressing them at home. To the left, first, we must declare and stand on the principle that Zohran Mamdani cannot be supported by revolutionaries. His road is the road back into political subservience to the Democratic Party. It is class collaboration, plain and simple. And those left organizations who explicitly or surreptitiously build his campaign only prepare massive betrayal. They see in Zohran or the Mamdani moment a real stirring of class consciousness, and not a tireless machine working to beat any seed of it into dormancy. For those who believe the only way to get anything done is to work within the political establishment, we must fight to show how this is a dead-end strategy. The American political system effectively deludes workers by telling them that the only avenue for change is through the ballot box. Our real power comes from what we actually do, not from votes for our enemies and backroom deals made by politicians, which is really their only purpose. In the words of Engels, universal suffrage is the gauge of the maturity of the working class. It cannot and never will be anything more in the present-day state. Abstention can be, in its way, a vote of no confidence in the government itself. It is not immaterial. It can be, if we fight to make it so, a recognition that the workers must organize themselves independently for their own interests. Instead of building support for Mamdani in the trade unions, which is the pattern to date, the left must go to the working class in its own name and prepare them for defensive struggle free of progressive misleadership. It has never been enough to sit on the electoral sidelines while we are under attack. A case for this kind of defense is the Open All Police Archives campaign launched by the Spartacist League. State secrecy is a concealed weapon under which the state and their police hide bloody attacks against workers, immigrants, and minorities. Forcing these archives to be made public is a demand around which we can rebuild the movement against black oppression, and winning our demands would place all the oppressed in a much stronger position. You will never win over NYC's black and brown masses if you will not take a clear side against the police who murder and terrorize them. Incidentally, it is also something any politician who claims to be on our side could do, but they will not, since doing so will cross a serious boundary for the state. To Zohran supporters on the left, I would challenge you to pressure him on this demand. Use it as a litmus test to see if some of the claims made in this forum about lines he cannot cross hold substance. To workers, we have no candidate in this mayoral election. Our only options are traitors and charlatans who will betray us at every turn. It is not wrong to abstain from such a proceeding. Far better in this reactionary period to dig in, fortify ourselves, and begin to organize such that, when we are ready, we can assert our will outside the halls of bourgeois government, which are always closed tightly to us. To do this, we must protect ourselves within our unions and workplaces, replacing in the process the trade union bureaucrats who chain us to the bosses and undermine our struggles. Anyone who demands we maintain an alliance with the boss's state which oppresses us demands we abandon our enormous independent power, substituting it with a worship of political theater, unfolding in a state which enforces its will only at gunpoint through cop deployments and National Guard occupations. In all likelihood, it will be Zohran who becomes the next manager of that state in New York City. We are in a period of decisive reaction. Zohran is incapable of defending the workers' interests because his program is a program of collaboration with the capitalist establishment. It is this establishment which exploits us and beats us down for our resistance. The hammer blows are falling. We can no longer afford to proceed in open or concealed alliances with those holding the hammer or those willing to offer us up to it in exchange for their place in politics. Let's break from Zohran. To protect ourselves, to fight reaction, and win not just New York, but the country and the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Carson.